You ever have something in pop culture just miss you? Like there was some movie or TV show or band that got wildly popular for a time, but for whatever reason it just wasn't your thing. And I guess in 2025 we can also add streamer or YouTuber to that list as well. For instance, both AEW and WWE recently have had appearances from internet personalities that I'd only possibly heard of in passing, but I'm sure other people were delighted to see them. The whole point is there's so many things going on all the time that it's easy to simply have something pass you by because you're too busy working or paying attention to the things that you already know that you care about. And just from personal experience, this is definitely something that speeds up as you get older, as there's just all sorts of things out there that I simply don't have the time or energy to experience, much less become a fan of. The lesson, of course, is don't get old. But this occurred for certain things when I was younger as well, and one of the big properties of the 90s that I missed out on was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and all of its associated follow-up series. Although with Power Rangers, did I really miss anything? I kid. But I was reminded of this when I attended C2E2 here in Chicago recently, because as I was walking up and down the various aisles in the vendor area, there was a booth of meeting for the Power Rangers, and they might as well have been selling insurance, as I had zero desire to stop and see what all the fuss was about. However, I should probably pause for a second, because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me, and because you didn't grow up in the 90s, you also don't know what a Power Ranger is. Believe me, I also wish I didn't know. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where I really should probably try to stop insulting the Power Ranger fans that clicked on this video. Probably. Anyway, I'm about to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. I got curious about that Power Rangers table afterwards, and it turns out the reason why I had even less desire to stop than usual was because the group that they had at the table were all Power Rangers from after the original series, and as such weren't actors that casual nerds like myself might know. But I will say, in their defense, they were quite busy with other fans and people that wanted to stop and talk to them, so clearly there were other people out there that knew who they were. Which I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised by, because regardless of my indifference to it, Power Rangers managed to run uninterrupted for 30 years, and even though it's currently on hiatus, Disney Plus has already announced that it will be rebooting the series, with showrunners already picked out, and apparently Paramount is working on another Power Rangers movie as well. This week's game, however, takes us back to a simpler time, when Power Rangers Mania was at its highest and the original series was still in full swing. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was released for the Sega CD in November of 1994 in the United States, and then a few months later in Europe. You might remember that back in episode 179, I reviewed the Genesis version of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and even though they were both on the shelves for the Christmas of '94, they are not the same game. So is the Sega CD version better than that Genesis release? Worse? Do they share anything in common at all? Well, we'll take a look at all that and more, but first, a look at the package. And here's my copy of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Sega CD. It's in pretty nice condition, and while there's a few scratches here and there on the outer cover of the extra large jewel case, considering that it's 30 years old, that's more or less to be expected. I'm just happy that it doesn't have any of the stress fractures or broken hinges that are common for these type of cases. Also, the tray insert doesn't have any issues, and the manual is fully intact as well, with both not having any water damage or sun bleaching. Given the fact that I'm not exactly a Power Rangers fan, this copy is more than enough for me, but if you're looking for one for yourself, they are relatively cheap, with complete copies going for around $25. Well, assuming you're looking for a US copy anyway, as the European version, unsurprisingly, is going for substantially more money. Why did I agree to collect European exclusive Mega CD titles again? Anyway, as far as the front cover goes, I like it, despite the fact that there's 2 red flags announced here. The cover is essentially the same art used on the standard version of the Genesis release, which I could see potentially confusing gamers into thinking that they're similar games, but it also makes sense that they would just use the same artwork from branding and advertising purposes. Of course, that makes the alternate Genesis cover that much more confusing, and I've never seen an answer as to why that even exists. Anyway, the Mega CD version is even simpler with just the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers logo on the same black background, and I'm assuming that's due to the much smaller cover real estate on those releases. Regardless of the layout, they both get the job done, but I'm definitely partial to the Sega CD version because that Mega CD cover is just a bit too minimal. I do have to mention those 2 red flags though before we flip to the back. Notice at the top that it states that this is a Sega True Video production, and then at the bottom that it's a all live video action adventure. Yep, you guessed it, we've got a full motion video Power Rangers adventure game going on here, which is why this is a different game than the Genesis release. If you don't remember, the Genesis release was a one-on-one fighting game, which was pretty appropriate for a show like Power Rangers. I'm open to the developers trying something different on the Sega CD, and actually it's nice to not have to review 2 games with minimal differences, but anyone that knows anything about full motion video games knows that especially on the Sega CD, we could be looking at something decent or something really, really bad. Now, flipping over the back, and there's actually some decent quality screenshots here that make the game look pretty nice considering this is a Sega CD that we're talking about. In fact, like a lot of the time with these Sega CD and full motion video games, I have to wonder if there wasn't a bit of cheating going on. Specifically, in the case of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, there was apparently a 32X CD version planned but not released, and I almost wonder if these shots actually came from that 32X version instead, because they're clearly still a little grainy, but they're just a bit more colorful and detailed than I would expect from a Sega CD title. Regardless of all that, there's not a ton going on back here as far as selling the game is concerned, just some basic details that honestly seem a bit conflicting, in that it refers to the game as a live video action adventure game featuring scenes from 9 episodes of the show, but then it also mentions punching and kicking, seeming to indicate that it's still a fighting game. More on that in a bit. Opening up the case, and the manual is in decent shape, although it clearly seems to have been used. Although I'm not exactly sure what for, because if you look at it, this is one of those that probably should have been referred to as a pamphlet rather than a manual, with a grand total of 8 pages of actual content. However, even with that bare bones approach here, I can't really complain too much because, at least as presented, there's just not a whole lot to explain. However, I've got to mention the ad on the back for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers fan club, which for only $18 got you everything included in this picture, including a sweet exclusive VHS tape. Thankfully, if you missed your chance to get in the fan club, that videotape has been digitized and uploaded to YouTube, and, well, it's very interesting. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, that's the package. Let's get Morphin on the Sega CD and see what trouble the Power Rangers are in this time. So far on the channel, full motion video games have kind of been broken into 4 categories. We've got the classic control matching game, like a Dragon's Lair or one of my personal favorites, Wirehead, where you're having to react to prompts on the screen to hit the correct button. And then there's also light gun games like Crime Patrol or Who Shot Johnny Rock, action games like Ground Zero Texas or Sewer Shark, and even adventure games in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. So probably the first question that comes to mind when talking about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is where does it fit in the grand scheme of things, considering that the rear cover calls it an action-adventure game and mentions specifically kicking and punching. Well, you probably wouldn't be too surprised to find out that despite the claims of hand-to-hand combat action on the cover, what they mean when they mention action here is more of the Dragon's Lair variety, where there's plenty of action on screen, but you're not really in control of any of it. If you haven't played Dragon's Lair or its brethren Space Ace, you're presented with an animated scene,
And while the scene is playing, you'll have to either press a direction or the action button when shown a prompt on screen, with a successful press playing out the rest of the scene and leading into the next one, whereas an unsuccessful press will instead switch to a death animation and the using up of one of your lives, before giving you another chance to play through the scene. For those games, while you're still not really controlling Dirk or Dexter and instead just reacting to prompts on the screen, it still felt like playing a game because each scene was different and some scenes even had multiple choices in the prompts and you had to choose which made sense to try based on how the scene was playing out. And despite how admittedly limited those games are, because they appeared so early in the arcades, gamers tended to cut them some slack for being limited due to how technically advanced they were at the time. As mentioned, unlike those Cinematronics arcade titles, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for Sega CD did not come out in the early 80s. Instead, its release for the Sega CD around Christmas in 1994 puts it relatively late in the console's lifecycle, with games for the Sega CD drying up at the end of 1995. Because of that, some of the novel nature of a game with that type of playstyle was gone, so a game like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers would really need to do more than just appeal to gamers that weren't rabid fans of the show and that would buy anything with the Power Ranger name on it. Unfortunately, it could be argued that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers doesn't do more than those classic arcade titles, and instead it actually does significantly less, even though there's technically about 3 times as much content here. And I'm sure that probably sounds confusing because having more content usually is considered a good thing, so let me try to explain. The base concept for the game is actually somewhat sound, with using the multimedia aspect of the Sega CD console to provide a unique interactive Power Ranger experience, direct from the TV show itself. This was accomplished by taking what was originally 11 episodes from the first season and editing them down into 9 shorter episodes that average about 5 to 6 minutes apiece. And from a fan perspective, I think they went with some good choices here, as they went with the pilot, Day of the Dumpster, to introduce the Power Rangers, and then moved into Green with Evil, the 5-episode series that introduced Tommy the Green Ranger, and then moved to the 2-episode The Green Candle, which culminated in Tommy losing his powers, and then closed with Crystal of Nightmares and Doomsday. If you're not a fan of the show, I'm sure that's probably all flying over your head, and even for myself, I wouldn't have really known any of that without doing research for this video. But knowing that they really were trying to present an interactive experience that was authentic to watching the TV show is something that I could definitely see the fans appreciating. There's just one problem. The game is essentially just watching the TV show, but with most of the actual show removed, and what's left is converted into a pixelized, lower color version of what you could normally just watch on TV or recorded onto a VHS tape. This is why I said earlier that the game actually does less than, say, a Dragon Slayer or a Space Ace, because rather than actually pressing prompts to interact with what's going on the screen, you're instead just watching for and responding to the prompts while all of the video action rolls on in the background, making each episode into one long QuickTime event. Except now, the only thing that occurs if you fail one of the prompts is that you lose health and the screen shakes, reflecting that miss, but otherwise the video just rolls right along. And perhaps this is unfair, but modern takes on QuickTime sequences usually indicate a failure by having the action branch to a different sequence reflecting that failure. So when you play Power Rangers in 2025, it feels like something is missing. I wouldn't expect the game to go on to a full-on failure animation like Dragon's Lair, because it's not set up for one-hit kills like that game, but it does take the player out of the action for a bit to realize that the video is going to just keep playing until the player runs out of health. To be fair to the designers, the prompts on the screen do match up with what's going on in the action. If the Power Rangers or one of the various Zords are jumping up at that point in the video, you'll probably get a prompt to press up on the D-pad. And then if they're diving at something on the ground, it will be a prompt to press down instead. And then the same goes for A, B, and C, with the A button being used to match up with the on-screen punches, B button being for blocks, and C button being for kicks. So theoretically, if you haven't memorized the action in that particular scene, you might still be able to predict a prompt based on what's currently going on in the action. It's still not Final Fight, clearly, but at least what you're doing as a player makes sense as the game attempts to put you in the action. Also, according to the manual, supposedly each episode has a hidden prompt where you can hit that button multiple times rather than just once to regain health, which would be important for the harder difficulty levels. I like the idea of having this bonus in the game to add to gameplay, but unfortunately during my time with it, the prompt is a bit too hidden, so it ends up being more of an Easter egg rather than an actual gameplay feature. Let's discuss that aforementioned difficulty for a bit. When you're booting up the game, the startup menu is very minimal. After the familiar intro video plays, you're taken directly to a screen where you can choose between beginner mode, intermediate, or expert. As you would expect for higher difficulty levels, the prompts on the screen are quicker and you have less time to respond. I like the idea here because the difficulty levels do have an appropriate difference in challenge, with beginner being more appropriate for younger fans of the show, but in my opinion, expert is perhaps a bit too difficult. And of course, hard mode should be hard, I get that, but it's profoundly hard, as I was able to make my way through beginner and intermediate, but then as soon as I tried out expert, I wasn't able to make it through the first episode, which seems perhaps to be a bit too high of a jump. Normally I wouldn't have a problem with that, and just leaving expert mode to the more hardcore fans of the show in the game. But the difficulty levels are such that you can't see the whole game without playing an expert, with only the first 5 episodes available in beginner, and then the first 7 in intermediate. Having only part of the game be available in easier difficulties isn't in any way unique to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and this is actually something we just saw on the channel in the recently reviewed Castle of Illusion. But most of the time, that sort of thing is limited to just easy being downgraded rather than normal. I think my main concern here is that the game already suffers from a lack of true gameplay, and by walling off the final 2 levels to just the most hardcore, I think what you end up with is a game where those last 2 levels are probably never going to be seen outside of YouTube playthroughs, meaning that a game that is already potentially very short on the lifespan is going to be that much shorter. Or this is all just an old man with diminished reaction times complaining about nothing. I suppose that's a valid response as well. From a graphics standpoint, I was actually pretty impressed by the quality of the video that they were able to get out of the Sega CD. Now, some of that may be the fact that I'm able to play this game via a modern RetroTink scaler, but I think it also reflects on the maturity of development on the console at the time, with the video being much closer to what we saw in Wirehead than what came on earlier titles like Sewer Shark or Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. I still think that it's possible that the screenshots on the back of the package were either cleaned up somehow or came from that mythical 32X version, but after playing the game, they're a lot more accurate than I originally gave them credit for, which is a good thing. The video is still going to be rough compared to anything besides maybe a 2nd or 3rd generation VHS tape, but it's totally playable, pixelization and all. On the audio side, well, it's all digital sound sourced directly from the TV show, minus the sound effects that play when you respond to a prompt, so you probably know what to expect. But I did notice one thing when playing the game. For whatever reason, there's a substantial amount of audio hiss underneath all the action. It's uniform and always there, so it seems to have come from when the video was converted to the Sega CD format, and I just don't understand why that wasn't cleaned up. It reminds me of what a bad VHS tape would sound like back in the day, so I almost wonder if it was present going back to how Sega originally captured the video. It's not a huge deal, and chances are you'll be too busy playing the game to care, but it's definitely noticeable. I'm going to close things by saying some possibly unexpected nice things about the game. First, I really appreciate the fact that Sega tried to do something different here, and we don't just have the same game as what appeared on the Genesis, but with an intro video and improved music. To me, that would have been a waste of time. Also, I want to remind people that I am not a fan of the show for this next part. I'm pretty ambivalent to it. But I have to give credit to the game designers when editing the video sequences from the show into the game episodes. They did a really good job of highlighting what made the show exciting and fun for kids, and I even felt myself getting into a bit and being disappointed when the intermediate mode ended without the last 2 episodes, because I wanted to keep playing. Having said that though, while it's a solid effort for what it is, it's just really not that much of a game, and it definitely screams rental to me. rather than something that all but diehard fans would actually want to play more than a few times. Due to that, I'm giving Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Sega CD 2 stars. It's not terrible, and the developers managed to make a game that could probably get the attention of even non-fans of the show for an hour or so, but it's not something that should be held up as one of the highlights of the Sega CD library.
And that's it for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Sega CD. This is one of the reviews on the channel where I went into things having no clue what I was getting myself into, and that made things a bit exciting, even with my indifference to the source material. And I want to be clear, I don't hate Power Rangers, it just wasn't ever my thing. But having said that, after playing the game this week, I think I have a new appreciation for the show because when it was entertaining, it was fun to watch, especially if you turned your brain off for a bit and just enjoyed the action on the screen. I could maybe see fans of the show even giving this game 3 stars, but to me, I would think that even if you were a fan, you would have to be realistic about wanting to have more lasting value out of a game. Next time on the channel, well, we're actually staying on the Sega CD again, and it's a game that, well, is probably going to make me long for the action and interactivity of Power Rangers. And that probably sounds bad from a game perspective, but that's because I don't really think this next review is for a game, so to speak. Now, you're probably somewhat confused by this, but just keep in mind that the Sega CD had a few releases that weren't really considered games, with it being a multimedia device. And I've actually already reviewed one of those when we took a look at Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia back in episode 180. This may be one of the more obscure clues that I've given, but I'm hoping for a guest appearance from 80s detective duo Simon & Simon in this one. And if you don't get that, don't worry, I'm sure I'll explain it in the intro next week. I've got to fill time somehow. Anyway, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 279. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.